The cryogenic pod hummed with a rhythm that Kevin had learned to recognize over his 15 years aboard the Meridian's Echo. It was the sound of life suspended, of time held captive in frozen stillness. But tonight, something was different. The pod in Bay 7C shouldn't have been active. According to the ship's manifest, that section had been sealed off since the colony wars ended 3 decades ago. Kevin pulled his thermal jacket tighter as he descended the metal stairs into the lower bay. The temperature here was kept at -40 degrees Celsius, cold enough to preserve the backup systems, but not cold enough to trigger the emergency protocols. His breath formed crystalline clouds that dissipated into the darkness beyond his headlamp's reach. The pod stood in the center of the bay like a glass coffin, its surface covered in a thin layer of frost that sparkled under the harsh LED lights. Inside, perfectly preserved, was a young woman. Her skin was pale, not from death, but from the cryosleep that had kept her suspended between moments. Dark hair fanned around her head like a halo, and even through the ice-kissed glass, Kevin could see the peaceful expression on her face. But it was the note that made his blood run colder than the surrounding air. Attached to the pod's exterior control panel, yellowed with age and partially obscured by ice, was a handwritten message on actual paper, a relic in an age of digital everything. Kevin carefully scraped away the frost and read the words that had been scrawled in desperate, hurried handwriting. Left to freeze with a note that said, "No one's children. The authorities wouldn't take her. Said she was born outside the colony charter. No rights, no identity, no future. I've put her in cryosleep. Maybe someone somewhere will have the courage to do what we could not." The date stamp on the pod's display read, March 17, 2247, 32 years ago. Kevin's hands trembled as he accessed the pod's diagnostic systems. The readings were stable, remarkably so. Whoever had placed this woman in cryosleep had known what they were doing. The cellular preservation was perfect, the neural activity patterns showed no degradation, and the revival protocols were all intact. He should have reported this immediately. Protocol demanded it. The Meridian's Echo was a research vessel, not a rescue ship, and unauthorized cryopods were a serious violation of interstellar law. The woman inside had no legal status, no identification chip, no citizenship in any recognized colony. She was quite literally no one. Kevin looked at her face again through the frosted glass. In sleep, she appeared no older than 25. She would wake up the same age, having lost 32 years without experiencing a single moment of them. The human whispered, "You're mine now," Kevin murmured, though he wasn't sure why he said it aloud. It wasn't a declaration of possession, it was a promise, a commitment. He made his decision. The revival process took 6 hours. Kevin worked methodically, following procedures he'd only read about in training manuals. The Meridian's Echo was equipped for emergency cryorevivals, but they were meant for crew members, not mysterious frozen women found in abandoned cargo bays. He disabled the bay's monitoring systems, a risky move that could cost him his position if discovered, and rerouted power from non-essential systems. If anyone asked, he'd say he was running diagnostics on the backup cryo units. It wasn't a good lie, but it would buy him time. The pod's temperature began to rise incrementally, 0.5 degrees every 10 minutes. Too fast and the cellular structures would rupture. Too slow and the revival chemicals wouldn't distribute properly through the bloodstream. Kevin monitored every metric obsessively, heart rate rising, brain activity increasing, oxygen absorption normalizing. The woman's fingers twitched, the first voluntary movement. Then her eyelids fluttered. At hour 5, her eyes opened. They were gray, a startling storm cloud gray that seemed to hold depth beyond measure. For a moment, she simply stared at the pod's ceiling, her expression blank. Then her gaze shifted to Kevin, and he saw the confusion bloom across her features. "Easy," he said softly, activating the communication system. His voice would sound distorted through the pod speakers, but it was better than silence. "You're safe. You're on the Meridian's Echo, a research vessel in the outer colonies sector. My name is Kevin. I'm going to get you out of there, but you need to stay calm. The revival process isn't complete yet." She blinked slowly, processing. Her lips moved, forming words he couldn't hear through the sealed pod. "Don't try to talk yet," Kevin said. "Your vocal cords need time to recover. Just breathe. Focus on breathing." She nodded slightly, a good sign. Cognitive function appeared intact. The final hour was the most dangerous. As the pod's door seal broke and the atmospheric pressure equalized, there was always a risk of shock, of the body rejecting the revival. Kevin had prepared stimulants and stabilizers, but he'd never administered them before. His hands were steady despite his anxiety. The door hissed open, releasing a cloud of vapor that smelled of ozone and something organic, almost sweet. The woman sat up slowly, her movements deliberate and cautious. She was wearing a simple gray jumpsuit, standard colony issue from decades ago. "Welcome back to the living," Kevin said, offering her a thermal blanket. She took it, wrapping it around her shoulders with trembling hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was hoarse but clear. "How long?" 32 years. The information didn't seem to shock her as much as he'd expected. She simply nodded, as if confirming something she'd already suspected. "And you are?" Kevin Frost, Chief Systems Engineer on the Meridian's Echo. "Elsa?" She met his eyes directly, and he saw something fierce in that gray gaze. No last name, no colony designation, no citizenship code. She pulled the blanket tighter. "I'm guessing you read the note." "I did." "Then you know what I am, what I was." She stood, testing her balance on legs that hadn't supported weight in 3 decades. "I'm an illegal birth. My parents were colony workers who violated reproductive restrictions. When I was born, they tried to register me, but the colony council refused. Said the population quota was full. Said I had no right to exist." Kevin had heard of such cases, though they were rare. In the early days of colonization, when resources were scarce and survival uncertain, colonies had implemented strict population controls. Children born outside the quota system were considered illegal, non-persons with no legal standing. "They put me in cryo," Elsa continued, her voice steady despite the weight of her words. "Said maybe in the future things would be different, maybe there'd be a place for people like me." She laughed bitterly. "Has anything changed?" Kevin wanted to tell her yes, that the world was different now, that such barbaric policies had been abolished. But the truth was more complicated. The colony charter laws were still in effect in many sectors. She would still be considered illegal. "I can't offer you citizenship," Kevin said honestly, "but I can offer you something else." "What?" "A choice, a life." He took a breath. "The Meridian's Echo is heading to the frontier territories. It's outside colony jurisdiction, a lawless region but also a free one. No quotas, no restrictions. People there don't ask about citizenship codes or colony designations. You could disappear into that population, start over." Elsa studied him with those penetrating gray eyes. "Why would you do this? You could lose your position, maybe worse." "Because someone wrote that note hopping for exactly this moment," Kevin said. "Because they believed that somewhere, sometime, someone would have the courage to help. And because—" he hesitated, then pushed forward. "Because I've spent 15 years following rules and protocols, and I've seen what happens to people who fall through the cracks. I'm tired of being complicit in a system that treats human beings as quotas and statistics." Something softened in Elsa's expression. "You're risking everything for a stranger." "Maybe, or maybe I'm finally doing something that matters." Over the next 3 weeks, as the Meridian's Echo traveled toward the frontier territories, Kevin taught Elsa everything she needed to know about the modern world. Technology had advanced significantly since her time. The quantum communication networks, the bio-integrated interfaces, the AI-assisted navigation systems. All of it was alien to her. She learned quickly, absorbing information with a hunger that suggested years of suppressed potential. She'd been 23 when she went into cryosleep, a young woman with dreams and ambitions that had been frozen along with her body. Kevin found himself drawn to her in ways that went beyond simple compassion. She was sharp, observant, and possessed a dry sense of humor that emerged once she began to trust him. She would sit in the observation deck late at night, watching the stars streak past, and he would join her, bringing coffee from the ship's galley. "Do you ever think about what you're giving up?" she asked one night. "What do you mean?" "Your career, your reputation. When this is discovered, and it will be discovered eventually, you'll be branded a criminal, harboring an illegal person, falsifying ship records, violating cryoprotocols." She turned to face him. "That's not a small thing, Kevin." He considered his answer carefully. "I used to think my career was everything. That following the rules, maintaining protocol, being the perfect engineer, that it mattered. But you know what I've realized? All those years of perfect compliance, and I never felt like I was actually doing anything. I was just existing, going through motions. And now I feel alive. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm making a choice that matters, like I'm affecting something beyond maintenance reports and efficiency ratings." Elsa smiled, a genuine warm smile that transformed her entire face. "You're a good man, Kevin Frost. I'm just someone who found a frozen woman and decided she deserved better than being no one's child." "You're mine now," Elsa quoted softly. "That's what you said when you found me. I was half conscious, but I heard it." Kevin felt heat rise to his face. It wasn't meant to sound possessive. It was more like a promise that you wouldn't be alone, that someone claimed responsibility for you. "I know." She reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were warm now, no longer the frozen digits he'd first seen through the cryopod glass. "And I'm choosing to be claimed, not as property but as someone who belongs somewhere, with someone." The Meridian's echo reached the frontier territories on a cold morning in December. The station there, New Horizon, was a sprawling complex of interconnected modules and habitation rings, teeming with people from every corner of known space. Here, documentation was optional and questions were rarely asked. Kevin helped Elsa navigate the immigration process, such as it was. A board clerk stamped her temporary residency permit without even looking at her face. Just like that, she existed again. Not legally, perhaps, but functionally. They stood at the viewing port, watching the Meridian's echo prepare for departure. Kevin had resigned his position, submitted his formal notice, and packed his few belongings. His former captain had been surprisingly understanding, as if he'd known all along what Kevin had done. "Ready for the next part?" Elsa asked. "Which part is that?" "Building a life, the two of us, in a place where no one cares about quotas or colony charters or who has the right to exist." Kevin looked at her, this woman who had been frozen for 3 decades, who had been declared no one's child, who had been left to die in the cold darkness of space. She was smiling, her gray eyes bright with something he recognized as hope. "Yeah," he said, taking her hand, "I'm ready." Outside, among the infinite stars, the Meridian's echo fired its engines and disappeared into the void. But Kevin and Elsa remained, two people who had found each other across the impossible distance of time and circumstance, proving that sometimes the most human thing you can do is whisper to the forgotten, "You're mine now." And mean it as a promise, not of ownership, but of belonging.